Hey, Animal Allies. I'm just waiting a moment for folks to join us, but I'm so glad to be here with you all. And I'm so happy today with Wayne and Steffan that they are joining us. Wow, this is great. We're going to talk today about the victory with Ridgeland Farms. So, how is everybody though, and what's happening in your part of the world? Please feel free to chime in to the comment section. Let us know if you're with any particular grassroots group. Please give yourself a shout out. We'd love to know who's here, who's joining us, and connect with one another always, 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 and what activism you're currently involved in. We are going to dive deeply into the unfolding Ridgeland Farm victory today, as we're joined by Steffen from ALLDP and Wayne from the Simple Heart. They are instrumental in this victory. But just a bit about AAC first. AAC was created to equip activists with the tools, community, and resources they need to boldly participate in our global animal liberation movement. AAC offers a free 3-month mentorship program, free educational live streams and online training, a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour, and we host large-scale in-person collaborative activism events around the country. Reminder, it is time to register for our New York City Fur Free Weekends coming up November 27th through 30th, 2025, 4 days of back-to-back actions for animals. Please register if you haven't already. If you plan to attend, even if you're not taking housing is probably full at this point, but still we ask everyone to register so we know who's coming and we can be in communication with you. And we're going to put that link tree in the comments. There's also the upcoming LA in 2026, our LA convergence. So hopefully we can also share some information in the comment section about that as well. So before I pass it over to Wayne and Steffan, in brief, we were going to show some video of the dogs themselves at Ridgeland Farms, but we're having some technical glitches. But we will share that link so you can check out what Wayne had posted in terms of some of that footage. But Ridgeland Farms in Dane County, Wisconsin, a biomedical research facility which was being investigated for animal abuse, agreed to surrender the license that allowed them to breed dogs to be sold for research. As part of the agreement, Ridgeland Farms will shut down its dog sales and breeding for sales operations. It will need to surrender its license by July 1, 2026. In exchange, the state will not file criminal charges. However, Ridgeland Farms remains in operation and is still able to breed dogs and conduct its own research. So, though I am not the expert, there is a large scope with all of this. But hey, you guys, welcome, Wayne. Welcome, Steffan.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Good to have you both here. Congratulations to both of you, and congratulations to the village of activists that this took. Great news for future dogs and a much needed boost for activists. So I guess I'll pass it to Steffan first. And Steffan, do you want to just give us a little bit of a summary of where we are and what people need to know about this?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many places to begin, but really it's been a years-long effort, first with activists like Wayne, who conducted an open rescue exposing what was happening at Ridgeland, then a criminal trial of those activists, and then a special prosecutor campaign, essentially asking the state of Wisconsin to intervene and to charge the corporation criminally for just rampant abuse of dogs. And ultimately what this all culminated in, these years of activism, these years of grassroots efforts and pressuring the government, is that Ridgeland ultimately agreed in exchange for dropping all of those charges, or rather not even bringing those charges in the first place. They were going to surrender the breeder's license. So they were going to give up breeding dogs for research, which was really the sort of focus of their business. That means thousands of future dogs will not be raised in these horrific conditions and then sold off for really painful experiments. So that's absolutely a huge win. At the same time, there are still thousands of dogs at Ridgeland right now, and Ridgeland has until July 1st to sell those dogs off. And so we still need to do everything we can to get those dogs out. And so it is in some ways a big win, but it is only a half win until we can get those dogs out.
Beautiful. Wayne?
Yeah, I mean, it is a bittersweet victory because this is a massive outcome, in many ways an unprecedented outcome, to go from me and some of my friends facing serious prison time, 15 years, to shutting this facility down. But the problem is the dogs are still in cages. And I think this issue is something that everybody should be thinking more about, not just because we care about dogs and we should care about dogs. Shame on you if you don't. And not just because, I mean, there's 100 million possible animals in laboratory experiments being tortured in ways most of us can't imagine. If you hear about this crazy story involving macaque monkeys in Georgia, I think it was, just getting shot down after this horrible traffic accident, that just shows you how callous and brutal this industry is, that living beings are just mowed down like garbage when they're in a traffic accident. But I think there's a bigger story here, which is about the abuse of power. And I think that what happened at Ridgeland Farms, and frankly, what continues to happen at Ridgeland Farms, is a very disturbing demonstration of how broken and corrupt our political system is. And even someone like J.D. Vance, the vice president of the United States, recently was doing an interview, and he said, you can't trust anyone. You can't trust the system when they abuse an innocent animal. I agree with the vice president on this issue. And what the Ridgeland story tells us is that you cannot trust the authorities to act when there are powerful people and corporations on the other side. And the only reason we won was because we had a huge number of very powerful grassroots activists and enterprising lawyers like Steffan pushing up against that power. And it was a decade-long fight. So that fight will continue. But the lesson for all of us is there are some very, very bad things happening behind closed doors when it comes to the abuse of power.
Yeah, absolutely. This is just a window into that, a large window. But so you said, Wayne, that they will likely sell the dogs. Is that, or it's up in the air right now? And how many dogs are there? What do you predict will happen? I know it has a lot to do with
the most recent federal inspection report from I think it was December of 2024 indicated there are 2,424 and change dogs left. We don't know how many are there now, but it's almost certainly in the thousands. And the stipulation that was reached with Ridgeland Farms over the last few weeks gives them the right to continue to sell those dogs until July, which is bizarre because the stipulation also indicates there was a clear finding of felony animal cruelty. And say you find a drug gang is involved in some sort of felony criminal conduct. You don't say like, oh, you got to shut down, but we'll give you another 6 months. We'll give you another 7 or 8 months to keep selling drugs and beating people up and murdering people. You say we got to shut this place down now. And this is just one of many examples of how power has distorted the criminal justice process. So part of what Steffan and I and many other activists, Dane for Dogs, the Marty Project, PETA, so many different groups are working on right now is finding every path possible to ensure the dogs that remain at Ridgeland Farms are not sold off to experiments, are not continuously tortured in the cages they've been tortured in some cases for 7 or 8 years, but get out into loving homes. And I can't think of a better holiday story than for all these thousands of dogs to get the gift of freedom.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want to keep their image and their heart front and center with us. Because when you think about them, when all of us think about them, I want to cry for them. My heart breaks for them. They're still in it. And it sucks. And animals always get the shit end of the stick. So we want to prevent that as much as possible. So, Steffan, is there any way you can talk about Richard Van Domelen? He allowed unlicensed staff to perform surgical procedures without anesthesia. Can you comment about that and talk about that?
Yeah, so Rick Van Domelen is the head veterinarian at Ridgeland Farms. And so he's essentially the person in charge of the veterinary care for these thousands of dogs in the custody of the company. And as part of his veterinary duties, or as one of the things that he did as the head vet, was that he allowed non-veterinarians, just ordinary employees, to conduct what are called cherry eye surgeries, or really more accurately described as mutilations, where they essentially cut off an infected part of the dog's eye glands without anesthesia, aftercare, blood control, or anything else. It's worth noting that anytime anyone does this, it's felony animal cruelty, it's mutilation, it's absolutely unacceptable. The fact that non-veterinarians were doing it is, another level of concern. And so because of some of the activism on the ground, especially by Dane for Dogs, once this came to light, they essentially submitted a complaint to the Veterinary Examining Board, which is the Wisconsin agency that licenses veterinarians across the state. And they said, look, this is a clear violation. I mean, it's as plain as day of the veterinary regulations in Wisconsin. And then there was a series of hearings, and ultimately, as of now, his license has been suspended. It's not a permanent suspension yet, but they did have a full day hearing because they appealed the interim suspension. And after a full day hearing in front of an administrative law judge, in which Ridgeland called multiple witnesses and put on all of their own evidence, the administrative law judge upheld that suspension. So this is another one of those sort of promising avenues of being able to hold Ridgeland accountable, because they do need a veterinarian to be able to sign off. Anytime they transfer dog interstate, for example, they need a veterinarian to be able to sign off on that. And this is just another one of those things where when we began this process, we weren't necessarily thinking about the head veterinarian's license. I mean, that hadn't really occurred to me. But the more that this case builds, the more that you were able to get grassroots energy and focus here, the more these other avenues, these other sort of abuses came to light, and the stronger the case became. And so this is another one of the ways that I think that the pressure has been put on Ridgeland very successfully.
Yeah, Wayne, do you want to add anything to that about his suspension? Do you think this is putting fear into veterinarians who aren't doing the right thing? And it's also such a terrible representation of veterinarians. I'm sure great, humane, ethical veterinarians are also affected by this.
Yeah, we had some amazing veterinarians who stepped up for us in this court case. Tristan Rosenberg and, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name. What was the other veterinarian's name?
Lowell Wickman, a local
Wickman.
Wisconsin vet.
A local Wisconsin vet, and other vets behind the scenes. One of the most gratifying things to me about this case is that people like Rick Van Domelen, who are using their expertise to not just justify trying to put me in prison, because he is one of the people who's been central in calling us animal rights radicals, actually got a bunch of documents from Freedom of Information Act requests showing Van Domelen reaching out to various government authorities about this case, about me, about the other activists, saying they're terrorists, they're radicals, they're criminals. And for a long time, the authorities just accepted what these so-called experts were saying. But then they kind of looked at the facts and said, wait, you're calling this guy who just took a blind beagle puppy to the vet a terrorist? That seems like a little much. You're saying that it's normal to just mutilate a dog or rip out their vocal cords? And even more disturbing allegations, like Matt Reich, one of the employees, said there was at least one instance where a live beagle puppy was just thrown away into a freezer bag and disposed of, probably just buried alive. And you're saying this is all this normal veterinary practice, totally accepted conduct? That doesn't seem right. And so there's this weird kind of reality distortion that power can inflict on us. And this can happen to all of us. I think we have to really reflect, even individually, about when this is happening to us, because human beings are highly social animals, and like it or hate it, we're also highly susceptible animals when it comes to power. That when there's a powerful person or powerful system around, this is just how we evolved for 2.5 million years, even going back to Australopithecus and Homo habilis. This is how we survived as a species. When the chieftain told you, run and jump, you ran and jumped. And for a long time, people ran and jumped when people like Rick Van Domelen said that abusing animals is totally okay. And this reversal is probably the most dramatic. I've been an animal rights activist for 20 plus years. I've had some victories, had a lot of losses too. This is probably the most dramatic reversal of that narrative that I've ever seen, where you have all these powerful people. Ismail Zahn wasn't even willing to have a conversation with us, the original DA. And I will say, Tim Grunke hasn't been that much better. I mean, he's been better for sure. He actually investigated the crime. This is a special prosecutor who was appointed to look into the allegations after everyone realized Ismail Zahn was not doing his job. But more importantly than any particular authority figure, because I think these authority systems always fail, is the fact that so many people took it upon themselves to think for themselves, reflect, observe for themselves, find the information. And I don't mean just vegans and animal rights activists. I mean just ordinary people in places like Wisconsin. I mean people like the reporters in Wisconsin who were relentless about holding power to account throughout this entire process. And they themselves also ultimately figured out that, wait a minute, the things that these authority figures are telling us cannot be true. And that is part of the reason Rick Van Domelen has lost his license. I am not in jail, and Ridgeland Farms has been shut down.
Yeah, right. So, I just want to go back to what you said. If I'm a radical extremist, I'm going to fly that flag proudly. And yeah, I'm sure all of us will. But talk about you almost going to jail, Steffan. So after Wayne's case was dismissed, why did you not give up? Instead, you continue to shine a spotlight on Ridgeland. Good thing.
Yeah, I mean, Wayne and the other activists, I think, were going to extremely courageously use their case as a platform to shine a light on what was going on inside Ridgeland. And when the case was dismissed, they did something that, in my practice as a criminal lawyer, is very unusual. They objected to the dismissal of criminal charges against them. They said, no, please prosecute us. We want our day in court. We want to show what's going on. And basically, there was all of this momentum. I think that's why Ridgeland wanted the charges dismissed, because they knew that this was going to shine a light on them. And there was all these people that were going to be converging in Madison. And so we had all this energy, and suddenly it felt like the wind was out of our sails, but we wanted to keep that going. We knew what was happening at Ridgeland. We wanted the public to pay attention. And so we needed to find a new way of doing that. And that's when we came across this very sort of unusual law in Wisconsin that allows you to request a special prosecutor. Essentially go to a court and say, look, no one is taking action that's supposed to be taking action. We know a crime has occurred. Please appoint a special prosecutor to look into this. And initially we did that partially to sort of keep that momentum going and to be able to air out the horrible things that we knew were happening at Ridgeland. But this really was a situation where the case just got stronger and stronger the longer it went on. The more attention we got, the more grassroots energy there was. Matt Reich, who Wayne mentioned, the former employee who'd seen just really horrific stuff and is still traumatized to this day from what he saw. He came forward. We had not been in touch with him. He heard about this. He wanted closure. He wanted a way to speak up for the dogs that he wasn't able to speak up for while he was there. He courageously came forward. And so it's another one of those instances of the case getting stronger. We found out more info that we didn't even know at the time that we filed the petition. And then by the time we had a hearing where we could put all of this on in front of a court and for the press and sort of the court of public opinion as well, the case had become so much stronger. And it just became clear that what we thought was happening inside Ridgeland was horrific. And the reality was even that much worse.
Were you in the Airbnb when we found out the charges were going to be dismissed? I forget.
No, so I didn't actually fly out. So I was scheduled to fly out. I canceled my flight and spent the next few days just like working on the special prosecutor petition, just sort of doing legal research all day.
We dragged you into the case and made you lead counsel on it. Yeah, when the charges were dismissed, Steffan is correct. And it was pretty interesting because obviously, it was in many ways a victory when the charges were dismissed against us. And I just heard Chris Caraway, one of Steffan's colleagues, like literally screaming at the top of his lungs. I woke up at like 6 a.m. and Chris is just going, I couldn't even hear because he's, to be clear, Chris doesn't normally talk that way. I just was listening through 2 doorways, so I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying. I just hear him screaming at the top of his lungs, and I'm wondering if something's broken into the house. Is Chris hurt? Did a dog die or something? And I finally hear him say, they dismissed it. They dismissed it. And I think Chris's initial instinct was, this is good. This is like a victory. But he could quickly tell that for me and Paul and Eva, we were like, we just didn't know how to feel. Because we were, Eva said this so eloquently. I think she said this in court. Maybe it was after court in an interview. But she said, I've devoted so much of my life and my energy and spirit to these dogs. And the idea that this journey is going to end with the dogs continuing to be tortured and killed, that's not a resolution for me. This is, you might have dismissed the charges against me, but it feels like there's still something hanging over my head. So we were pretty deflated. I was genuinely pretty upset. And like, if you had been in the courtroom when we objected to the motion to dismiss, I was pissed. I was legitimately pissed. But thankfully, I credit honestly Steffan's clinic a lot for this, because I don't think this would not have happened if not for the existence of Steffan's clinic and Justin's, Justin, who's Steffan's boss, a legendary constitutional law professor who decided to devote his career to animals now. His idea to build an animal activist defense clinic many years ago. I don't think we would have had the capacity to sustain that energy, because I think one of the things that animal activists don't understand is that we can create these incredible self-sustaining cycles of change. Like, our movement has incredible power. There's so much support, but the problem is we can't build up to the point where we have the attentional resources and the other just basic resources to keep that fire burning. It's kind of like starting a fire, right? And it takes some work to get the fire started. And once it's burning, it's like, whoa, it's, almost out of control. It's a little scary how powerful it is. But we can't get to that point because we just don't have the right combination of resources and tools and capacities to get that fire burning. And, 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, you'd have a victory like this dismissal in the Ridgeland case from March 2024, and the fire burns out really quickly. And that was what we were scared of. That's why we were concerned, because we thought no one's going to forget about these dogs. We're all going to go home and be happy humans and not realize tens of thousands of dogs will continue to be subjected to these awful experiments indefinitely. And But we found a way to just keep that fire burning. And I think there's a lesson that for all of us, which is, I'm not saying be resilient and keep fighting when you're wasting your time. There are definitely times where I've kept plugging along on some campaign that was stupid and wasn't worth my time. And by all means, stop when you're doing stuff that's useless. But we thought this was a compelling narrative. We knew the public was on our side on this. And because we were resilient, even in the face of many obstacles, not just the criminal charges, but having, literally tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours of preparation all go down the drain because they dismissed the charges against us. We could have just said, like, damn, I guess we won't get our shot. But we kept fighting. And for that reason, Ridgeland has been shut down.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. What a great example of glad but not glad, and the importance, really highlighting the importance of pivoting. Yeah, so important. So, Wayne, I wonder if you could talk about like the footage that you got and footage in general, like the effects of the footage. So I guess, and always forgive my ignorance because I'm not 100% on all of the details, but a jury obviously never saw the footage, so it was more out for the public. Did anybody else of importance see the footage and undercover and whistleblower footage are so important?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a sore spot for me because this footage has been reviewed by the special prosecutor in this case, and partly based on his alleged review of the footage. I don't know if he's actually even watched a single second of the footage because it certainly doesn't seem like it based on his public response. He concluded there's no evidence of any continuing abuse of the animals at Ridgeland Farms, and no evidence that would justify seizing them and giving them the homes they deserve. In contrast, the people have actually seen the footage, whether it's journalists, people in the public, frankly, even people I know in the vivisection industry themselves, right? Because Ridgeland Farms is bad even for vivisectors, even compared to MBR in New York or compared to Envigo, was shut down by the federal government. There is no dog vivisection breeding facility that confines dogs in 2.2x4 metal cages their entire lives. It just doesn't happen. Envigo didn't do it. MBR doesn't do it. No one does it other than Ridgeland. There are no facilities that I'm aware of. I literally have been an animal rights activist for 20 years. I've never heard of facilities with so much filth and so much urine everywhere that an inspector says they're getting nausea from being there for a few minutes, and their eyes and their nose are still irritated hours later. It's like never existed before. And these are things we documented. We went inside in 2017 through an unlocked door, and we had actually this super fancy VR camera. We called it Jelly Squid. I used to not be able to say that because it was a code name we weren't allowed to say. I don't even remember exactly why we weren't allowed to say the code name of the camera. It's just the camera. But I think it's because it was prototype technology. Back when people thought VR was going to be big, turns out VR wasn't very big. No one cares about VR. Back in 2017, everyone thought VR was like the next big thing. Kind of like everyone thinks AI is going to be the next big thing. It's not. Just kidding. It might be. But
you heard it here.
Yeah. No. But anyways, so we spent so much effort and time documenting so meticulously with these extremely sophisticated cameras everything that happened. And the most disturbing thing to me is still, for years, authority figures weren't even willing to look. But if you get a chance, just scroll down my Twitter feed from either the original trial, March 2024, or actually more recently when the charges were announced. I've been posting a lot of videos and photos from Ridgeland. It is like impossible for any common sense person with an ounce of empathy towards animals to see Julie spinning in that cage and not feel a little desperate yourself. Because there is something about intense desperation and fear. I mean, all of us have had this experience. Like you see a human or non-human animal in an intense state of fear, not just like a little anxiety, not a little sadness, but like scared shitless, out of their minds, scared and upset and distressed, like desperate. And that is what you sense in the body language of a lot of these dogs. And we know it. We know it when we watch it. And it's not just one clip. I mean, we handed over to the media and to the authorities every second that we shot. In fact, that's one of the reasons they charged me, because I handed footage over about exactly what I did. And there are hundreds and hundreds of dogs distressed like that. And I still cannot fathom, to me. I mean, I really do try to think about, like, Ismail Azan, the DA of Dane County. What is he thinking when he sees this and goes home at night? And maybe he's got a dog himself. He doesn't have a dog, but he has a general sense that dogs are living beings. They're sentient. They feel things. My only explanation for how these prosecutors, like Tim Grunke and Ismail Azan, can act the way they do is they don't even spend a second imagining what it's like to be one of these dogs. Because if you spend even a second imagining what it's like to live in one of these cages, suddenly your entire life is transformed and you say they need to get out. So I think the video footage was crucial. And I think when Judge Rhonda Lanford, who apparently is a dog lover herself, granted, apparently Tim Grunke, the prosecutor, is also a dog lover and has a beagle and a picture behind him in his office. But I do think Judge Rhonda Lanford, she was editor-in-chief of the University of Wisconsin Law Review, incredibly respected, incredibly intelligent lawyer, did very good legal work. I mean, you could see how meticulous all our opinions are. Even if she ruled against us, I thought it was actually kind of reasonable, to be honest. But I think ultimately part of what motivated her probably was she spent at least a second in the mind of a dog trapped at Ridgeland Farms. And I think our legal system needs to have more people like this who have at least an ounce of empathy in them, because it changes the way you see the entire system once you start having empathy for its victims.
Mm. Yeah, beautifully put. And I really do encourage people to go to Wayne's social media and YouTube channel to see the footage of the dogs spinning. And I do want to talk a little bit more about the symptoms of trauma and anxiety and mental issues in caged dogs and how cruel confinement is, of course, over anything else. But Steffan, I was wondering if you could, what advice or cautions would you give activists who want to think about getting footage? Is there anything that they need to watch out for or know in advance?
So I have to be careful not to give legal advice. Obviously, you should go talk to a lawyer. But sort of speaking in general terms, I mean, one of the things I would encourage anyone to do who's interested in sort of undercover investigation or investigation of any kind is reach out to us. You can see ALDP on the screen. If you Google us, send me an email. I would love to set up a call. We can talk about any sort of specific issues you have. Depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, we can find local attorneys who will be very well versed in those laws. So that's my sort of first piece of advice is use us. Our goal is to be a resource for the animal rights movement. So please reach out to us, use us. Sort of generally speaking, I echo everything that Wayne said. I think there's nothing as powerful in some ways as footage when you can actually, it's undeniable. And so I think that's an essential part of the animal rights movement is continuing to have investigators, whether that's someone who goes undercover, someone who does an open rescue, or a former employee who maybe never thought of themselves as an animal rights activist, but sees horrible things, knows that it's wrong, and wants to expose it. And there are a lot of protections in place for people like that. There's whistleblower protections in many different states. And then also, as we've seen a lot of these cases are not just won in court, but also in the court of public opinion. And oftentimes it's almost like daring the industry. Do they want to take this to trial? Do they want to make this an even bigger platform? And so, I think there's a lot of considerations like that. And the other thing I want to say, just to echo some of Wayne's points, is, I'd seen the footage, dozens of times preparing for the special prosecutor proceeding. I'd click through all of the videos. I was sort of deciding which exhibits were we going to show. But then when I was in court and I had done it, but I'd done it sort of in discrete moments. I hadn't just like watched all of them for like a full day, the way that we were doing for portions of the testimony. And again, I remember in court being emotional and being like, I have to keep it together, because there's no way you can see this and not feel emotional, not feel terrified, not feel that sense of helplessness that all of these dogs feel. It breaks your heart when you watch it. And I think that's also why the special prosecutor proceeding, because Judge Lanford sat there and she saw this, I think it's partially why it moved her. She's an extremely smart judge, and I'm not going to, absolutely sort of as a matter of reason, she reached the right result here. But I think there's no way in which you don't also have, you are not deeply moved. And I think that's often where the law can be an impediment to social change for figures like DAs and just like important lawyers and stuff. You get separated from what's actually happening on the ground. You spend too much time thinking about the statutes and which agency is supposed to do this and who's supposed to do that. And it doesn't even have to be bad faith. I just think there's a way in which you almost end up distrusting the sort of emotional and moral part of your soul. And I think there's ways that we have to break through. And I think one of the helpful things about the special prosecutor proceedings is that we had an opportunity to break through. We were able to use this powerful footage. We were able to show a judge for hours on end, and there's no denying what she was seeing. And if we had that opportunity with more individuals in power, if they gave themselves the opportunity to feel it and to truly see it the way that Wayne was saying, I think that would make such a difference. And I think a lot of what we have to do is try to figure out how to get out from behind systems like law can sometimes be, that distance ourselves from the emotional, real impact of what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, can I jump on this? Because I think this is such an important point, because It is not just that these feelings and emotions and empathy are important from a moral perspective. They're often very legally relevant because, for example, many animal cruelty statutes define animal cruelty as unnecessary suffering. To determine whether there's unnecessary suffering, you have to have some empathy. And I think one of the problems with prosecutors and government officials across the country is they only think about the suffering of the powerful. It's like Jeffrey Epstein is an example. The entire country's thinking about Jeffrey Epstein. Like, the problem was, for decades, they didn't talk to any of the victims of his crimes. They only talked to the elites who are palling around with Jeffrey Epstein on jets to islands in the Caribbean. They're talking to billionaires who are exploiting victims instead of the victims themselves. And I will say, one of the most disturbing things about this case is, even when the special prosecutor decided to investigate this case, you can even see it from his own report. He apparently spent hours and hours talking to not only Ridgeland Farms, but even other factory farming interests. I was like kind of puzzled why in his report. It was weird to me because he disclosed this. He said, "Oh, I talked to the farming interest in La Crosse County about this dog experimentation case in Dane County." So he's talking to all these very powerful people, and he doesn't talk to the witnesses who actually saw the victims being abused. He did not spend a single second talking to the employees who saw dogs being tortured. I did talk to him, mostly because I kept berating him and telling him he needed to talk to me. But even with me, he did not spend a single second talking to me about the things that I saw, the footage that I saw inside Ridgeland Farms, about the experience of the dogs that I witnessed. Instead, he was very concerned about the interest of the powerful in that county. And that might seem like, oh, it's just one instance of corruption. But there is a larger pattern we're seeing, not just in America, but around the world, where powerful systems are not doing anything to be responsive to the needs of the vulnerable. That is a fundamental threat to human civilization. That might seem like an exaggeration, but I really think what we're seeing in Ridgeland County, or in Dane County with Ridgeland Farms, is a threat to human civilization, because as long as our governments are only responsive to the interests of those who are more powerful, our entire society will collapse because the people will revolt, and rightfully so.
Yeah, thank you for putting it into that broader perspective, and talking a little bit more about the psychological impact on that confinement has, and relating it to what you're saying, sort of the fight to have animals declared as sentient. Why are we even having that fight? Of course, we would say that they suffer and feel pain, and I know you can give Julie as an example, and in this regard, and it's also, as you said, comparable to the dog industry. You've been in there, so. Yeah. Anything else you want to say to bring the dogs front and center for folks who are just joining us with this?
Sometimes I feel like I'm too surrounded by amazing animal rights activists. So this might be a question for Steffan. What do you think, Steffan? I'm confused how anyone can think that animals are not sentient or not deserving of moral consideration. But apparently there are some people who feel this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I find that hard to imagine. I think everyone knows that animals are. Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm also in an echo chamber. I think it's pretty well established that animals are sentient. I think everyone knows this. I think it's why we have laws that prevent cruelty in animals. Whether those laws are enforced, and certainly whether they're enforced against powerful corporations, that's a different question. But I think in theory, I think we all recognize it. I think it's why these open rescues are so powerful, because I think it's when people realize, wait, they're going after the people who courageously went in and took a dog or a chicken or pig who's in desperate need of help and gave them help. And they're going after those people instead of the company that's profiting off of that. I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling. It does remind me, and maybe this is a little bit off topic, but one of the things in D.A. Grenke's report that he issued afterwards, where he said, well, I wasn't sure if there was actually enough probable cause about the shelter violations, about whether there was adequate space and whether the flooring was adequate, because we saw it only on a certain, small percentage of dogs that they had these lesions on their paws. And if you have thousands of dogs, inevitably you're going to have dozens, hundreds, or whatever of dogs who have some injuries, and that's just normal given how big the operation is, which I think is wrong as a matter of law, and so obviously wrong as a matter of morality, because it's not like if I do animal cruelty or any other crime on an industrial scale, I get to say, well, it's on an industrial scale, I'm allowed to have. That's not an excuse. That makes it worse. We see this with every factory farm. We saw this in Zoe Rosenberg's case, where they were pointing out how there was chickens being scalded alive. And one of the prosecution's responses was, well, yeah, but it's a very small number of them. But every individual animal, I mean, for that animal, that's their whole that's their whole existence, their whole life, right? That is their experience of life itself, is this these excruciating moments. And the law itself doesn't say if you torture thousands of animals, then it's okay if there's it doesn't say anything like that. It makes it worse, I think, the fact that you're doing it on an industrial scale, and then even if a small number are suffering, each one of those is an individual victim, an individual experience of life that's excruciating, and that is wrong. And I think it's so easy to get lost in these sort of industrial systems and to use that as a defense when really it isn't.
Yeah, I think Steffan's right, and I think that's a very good response to your question, because I think it isn't the case that people don't feel for animals or think they're not sentient. I mean, other than a handful of psychopaths, I just can't imagine anyone actually thinks when you kick a dog and she screams, there's some sensation there that is roughly equivalent to the pain that you and I feel. I think the bigger problem is this doctrine of necessary evil, that even if there's some evil, well, it's necessary. I mean, what are you going to say? Got to eat, right? And same thing with experiments. When you say, got to experiment, so some dogs just happen to go psychotic from a lifetime in a cage, I guess that's just what we got to deal with. And I mean, there are two responses to that. One is, well, not really, because a lot of these systems are being horribly mismanaged, right? You're not even living up to your own standards, much less the standards of the animal rights movement, which, could go on. And I just actually blogged about this. Like, why does the government never enforce animal cruelty laws? You could also say, or ask the question, why does the industry never even enforce its own standards and lie about its non-enforcement of its own standards? But there's a deeper reason the necessary evil doctrine just doesn't apply in this scenario or many other scenarios, which is there's a broader universe of possibilities out there. The possibilities aren't, one, we scald a few animals alive, or we scald a large number of animals alive, or one, we torture a small number of dogs, or we torture a large number of dogs. There's another possibility the doctrine of necessary evil is neglecting, which is we can just torture none of them. We don't have to do any of this, right? If we just shut down the slaughterhouse, then not even one chicken will go in the scalding tank alive. If we shut down vivisection facilities, dog will go psychotic from spinning in a cage. So I think that what happens a lot, and especially this is true of people in power, is they shut down the conversation by limiting the scope of possibility. And one of the great missions of an activist is expanding the scope of possibility, right? This is why, I mean, literally probably the most famous speech in the history of social justice is Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream. So it wasn't just about the tactics and the strategy and the community organizing he did, all of which were brilliant and amazing and effective. Is about the fact that he had a big dream, and that expanded the universe of possibility for so many people across this country and allowed us to build a world that was a little more kind for people of color and others too.
Thank you for that. So Wayne and Steffen, what is the scope of animal experimentation breeders and labs around the country now? And so my understanding is that Marshall Bioresources will be the only remaining major supplier of the dogs. I wonder how they feel about this, of course, for lab research. Now they'll be number one, and they have like 18,000 dogs. So I know you all don't have a crystal ball, in terms of the future, but what are your thoughts on that? Steffen, you could go.
Sure, I'll go, and then I'll let Wayne fill in any gaps. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It's MBR is the sort of last large supplier, and I think sort of we zoom out even just a little bit. Just a few years ago, there's three: Envigo, Ridgeland, Marshall. Envigo shuts down in 2022. Now, Ridgeland is going to be shuttering next year. Their breeding operation, that just leaves one. And so I think the supply chain, I mean, just even from a purely economic perspective, the supply chain is getting less stable. And I think hopefully everyone sort of sees the writing on the wall. This is that sort of Ridgeland is the second domino to fall, and there's just really one big domino left. So that's the hope. Yeah, I will say that I think that there's my sense is, and Wayne might be more plugged in here, is a move away from animal experimentation, or at least a recognition that it's that there, that used to be such an orthodoxy, I think, within the sort of parts of the scientific community. And I think that orthodoxy is being challenged. I think especially when it comes to doing research on dogs. So my hope is that this is really, the writing is on the wall. And I can't imagine that if you have 18,000 dogs. I mean, if you're an operation the size of MBR, that there isn't horrible things going on there as well. And I imagine that's where activists, I know that there's some activists I'm sure already focused on MBR, and that there will be more and more focus on them. And I'm sure things will come out, because I can't imagine an operation like that isn't doing horrific things behind the scenes. The only other note I'll have is that obviously the vivisection industry is massive. Overwhelmingly, it's using mice and rats, and that's the other thing, is that in some ways dogs, I think, they're an easier sort of foothold for us as the animal rights movement to get. Everyone has dogs at home, everyone loves dogs. It's very easy to see how hurting a dog is wrong. But I hope that we can keep this momentum going for all of the animals trapped in the vivisection industry, many of whom aren't even rodents aren't even, they're like invisible to the law in so many ways, and people do horrible things to them. So yeah, I hope that this is a significant domino for sure, but just one domino of many, because it's still such a massive industry that's inflicting just torturous pain on animals day in and day out.
Yeah, there are these horrible experiments involving mice where they basically intentionally drown them and see how other mice are responding. And they've done these experiments showing, so you basically drop a mouse into a tank and watch them drown, and you have another mouse that's offered food or offered the chance to help the mouse out. And they've repeatedly found, this is, I think, an experiment that's been replicated now, that the mouse will actually choose to not eat and save their, sometimes even a complete stranger, not just their friend. And these are animals that are almost completely neglected. I mean, they're not even counted in animal welfare reports. So we don't even know what the scale is. I mean, it's plausibly 100 million. If you include aquatic animals, rodents, the scale is massive. I will say, I have never been more optimistic about the fight against vivisection. Frankly, I've never been more optimistic about the fight for animal rights. I just think we keep winning and winning and winning. And the people who are pessimistic are just being idiots. I'm sorry. I'm just going to go there. If you're one of those people who's pessimistic, you're being an idiot. Because if you take a slightly longer time frame, I think too often people get caught up in the moment and think like, oh my God, Trump, oh my God, activism. It's like, yeah, there are a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong. I was in prison recently. My wife can't even get in the country because of Trump. And there's a lot of problems right now. But if you just take like even a slightly longer time frame, like instead of the last month, the last year, 10 years, the amount of progress the animal rights movement made is mind-blowing, even for me. Like, I am very optimistic. I did not expect we would have shut down basically all the dog research facilities in the nation in the year 2025. I would not have expected that fur was getting shut down across the country. I wouldn't have expected the Miami Aquarium gets shut down, and Lolita and all of the other orcas who had been tortured and slaughtered and held captive for decades in places like Miami Aquarium. All of them will now be free. They will live in the wild for the rest of their lives. None of them will be captured and forced to perform stunts for human audiences. The amount of progress we made is massive. And I think we can build on this. Specifically in vivisection, it is not just that Marshall probably is doing awful things. In some ways, they're better than Ridgeland. I will say this. So for example, if you look at the enclosures of Marshall, there was a whistleblower employee who recently disclosed footage and released some photos, and the enclosures are larger. And the dogs they even have these ramps and stuff. It looks like a terrible kennel, like a kennel from hell, like a place where if you're kind of a terrible guardian of a dog and you were thoughtlessly placing your dog somewhere, you throw them in a place you think it's an appropriate kennel. It's in fact a horrible prison. That's kind of what it looks like. Ridgeland just looks like a torture chamber. It just looks like this is just some sort of nightmare. But there have already been a number of disclosures about Marshall, including employees coming out and saying, hey, we are very uncomfortable because we're shopping at work in the mornings and there's just like a dog in a pool of blood and we have no idea why. And we're not even looking at this. This is again, terrible kennel. More like a prison than an actual kennel. Another employee released this footage of dogs experiencing training for inhalation experiments. So inhalation experiments are some of the most infamous experiments in the history of vivisection. It's a very famous photograph from like 30 or 40 years ago called the smoking dogs or smoking beagles experiment, where an employee basically snapped a photo of these beagles who had all these masks on, and they were basically being forced to breathe in cigarette smoke all day because we were trying to figure out, I wonder what happens when you force a dog to breathe cigarette smoke all day. Guess what? They die. They get emphysema and cancer just like us. So let's just stop smoking cigarettes. We don't need to continue to subject these dogs to these horrible experiments. little known to anyone until this employee released it last year, Marshall is training dogs to go through those same goddamn experiments, like 40 years after they led to massive public outcry, and again, you could just Google it, Marshall inhalation experiments. You'll see these photos and videos, these dogs and these masks like thrashing and trying to get out, but they're basically training them to just accept the abuse. And that's honestly just one of the most disturbing things about inherently the entire vivisection industry. They have bred and targeted these dogs precisely because they're docile and gentle. They are the right size. They will not fight back. So we can do things like forcing them laundry detergent, inject them with rabies, surgically mutilate them, and force them to breathe cigarette smoke all day, and they will not fight back. And there's just something deeply evil about that. When that is your approach to a being that's vulnerable, like if someone goes up to like a little sweet, meek dog and kicks them in the face, there is something deeply psychotically wrong with that person. And when you have an entire industry that has done this to beagles, setting aside the specific experiment, setting aside the specific facility, this is what vivisection has done to the beagles of this earth over the last 50 years. And my friend Jeremy Beckham wrote the best piece on this. Just Google radioactive beagles and you can read about the history of how beagles were chosen, how in the midst of the Cold War, we did just like mind-boggling evil things like radiate dogs and these hound holders to the point they'd have dozens of tumors and fractures and couldn't walk. This is what we're doing to thousands of beagles, all justified by the doctrine of necessary evil. And no matter what specific findings we make about Marshall, we know they are the biggest player, not just a player, the biggest player in an industry that has sent millions of dogs to horrible deaths over the last 70 years. And that has to end, and it will end, partly because of the work of people listening to this podcast.
Yes, we are part of that movement. Absolutely. It's monstrous and dystopian. But before we go on, Steffan, did you have to leave now in a minute?
I do have to leave, unfortunately. I did want to just quickly say that I think the lesson of Ridgeland, at least the lesson for me, is just the importance of activism and that we have to keep sort of grassroots activists front and center. All of this started because of the courageous open rescue that exposed what was happening in Dane County. Activists on the ground then took action for years and created the pressure and the conditions that led to this result. So I just cannot stress enough how important it is that people take action. I mean, these are ordinary people in Dane County who saw this, saw what Wayne had exposed, and then wanted to take action. They didn't necessarily think of themselves as activists before this, but I mean, they've contributed to a tremendous victory. And so, I would, I think that's why I want to thank you at AAC for the incredible work that you're doing. And then us at the Animal Activist Legal Defense Project, our goal really is to defend and empower activists. So anyone out there getting into good trouble, who needs help, please give us a call. Please, look us up, send me an email. And even if you just sort of want to get a lay of the land legally, you sort of want to know what your options are. Maybe you don't want to get arrested, but you sort of want to know what can you do sort of legally to protest. Talk to us. If you do get in trouble, also talk to us. Our goal really is to be sort of the legal arm for the grassroots animal rights movement, for the activists out there. So thank you so much to AAC and for everyone that's courageously doing this work. And we just want to be able to defend and facilitate what you're doing. So unfortunately, I do have to hop off now, though. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you for being with us for as long as you were able to. We'll share that website, and thank you for filling that void for activists and being there for them. Thank you so much, Steffan. So
yeah, and can I just say, it's not just me. I mean, Steffan can go, but it's not just me who's been targeted. I mean, obviously there's Eva Hamer and Paul Pickelsheim, my co-defendants in this case, but Scott Gilbertson, Jamie Hagenow, and Rebecca Robinson were sued by Ridgeland too, merely for basically pointing out Ridgeland's crimes. And a LDP stepped up and defended them. And we're going to get a decision soon, but my anticipation is the lawsuit against them is going to be dismissed because it's a blatant violation of the First Amendment. But this just, I mean, it's just so puzzling to me that, like, in so many ways, even setting aside the animal cruelty, I don't understand how the authorities can side with a big evil corporation against, like, the sweet ladies in Dane County, Wisconsin, who are just trying to do the right thing. I mean, the employees who are just disturbed that they had to hold a dog down while the dog's being surgically mutilated or having their vocal cords ripped out. I mean, just on a human level, like setting aside the animal cruelty, because, maybe there are some people, for whatever reason, their brains are broken and they can't figure out that dogs feel pain. But hopefully we all agree that humans can feel pain. And these industries are so evil to the humans involved. I mean, like, who goes into the Star Wars movie and comes out saying, I'm on the side of the Empire? right? Like, who goes into like the Dune movies and say, I want to be with the Harkonnens, the evil empire that's like mercilessly slaughtering people in gladiatorial pits. Like, we all want to be on the side of the ordinary people, of the little guy. And I think the thing that we have to understand is that our government is on the side of the empire
Right.
a lot of times. And it's just, it takes a little more nuance, a little more digging to figure that out. I highly encourage everyone, for example, to read the special prosecutor's report, because it's hard to read, partly because it's just incompetent and there's all these misspellings. Like the prosecutor accidentally refers to himself as an it. He gets a judge's name wrong. He keeps calling Judge Landford Judge Landon for some reason. But it also just shows you, when you read through it, how evil the empire is and how insidious it is at putting its tendrils into the brains of everyone involved in government. I've had a small degree of involvement in government. I ran for mayor in Berkeley in 2020. I've been involved in the Democratic Party for many years. I was little known. I don't think I've told this to anyone. I don't think this is on my CV. No one knows this about me. I was actually the vice president of the College of Democrats when I was in college. And I'm sorry for all the Democrats in your audience, but I'm going to say it.
Okay.
The Democratic Party is corrupt. It is completely, profoundly corrupt when it comes to animal issues. I'm not saying it's not better in some ways on other issues. I think, I'm an immigrant. I think the Democratic Party is better on immigration to me than the Republican Party. But this notion that if we vote blue, the problem will be solved, that is actually part of the problem. Because all these prosecutors I've talked about, Ismail Zahn, Tim Grunke, these are Democratic prosecutors. The prosecutor who went after Zoe Rosenberg and she's going to be sentenced in a couple of days, they may put her in prison. Those are Democratic prosecutors. And the donations from the industry, and I mean both factory farming and vivisection, they go to both Democrats and Republicans. And when every 4 years the presidential candidates go to Iowa, it's not just the right that bows down to big ag, it's the left too, right? It's the left that is just as enthusiastic about taking our taxpayer dollars and funding things like torturing puppies, funding things like roasting literally hundreds of millions of animals alive because they're too sick to be sold in a grocery store. This is a bipartisan evil that has to be confronted in a bipartisan way. And I think the lesson for me is we got to do it ourselves. I mean, this is why direct action is necessary. This is why, Gandhi 100 years ago said you got to be the change you want to see in the world. You can't just wait for someone else to bring the change. You've got to be the change. And there's so many ways to do that. And I mean, you at AC are doing this as well as anyone. It's like completely badass how many people you all have mobilized. And part of the reason for that is because you're helping people be the change. Don't just sit there and hope someone else does something. You are someone. You have the power to do something. Be someone who does something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. We can't rely on the government. We have to protect the innocent ourselves as much as we can. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about the mainstream media attention that this has gotten.
Yeah.
Talk about that a bit. Talk about the impact of that, positive or negative, and the quality of the coverage, and how important mainstream media coverage is in these campaigns, in these actions.
Yeah, it's so interesting because so often in mainstream media coverage, you see nothing at all, and then suddenly it's like a dam breaks and it explodes. And I think that's to a certain extent what happened with Ridgeland Farms. And I think the thing that caused the dam to break in this case was definitely the trial. I mean, the original investigation got, good amount of media coverage. Glenn Greenwald, legendary reporter, Pulitzer Prize winner, vegan. He reported on this back in 2018. Great story. Still think people should go read it. It's called Bred to Suffer. It's an amazing report. But I think Ridgeland made a huge mistake in coming after us. I'm grateful to them for coming after me because the story just mostly died. And it wasn't because of my lack of trying. I was reaching out to journalists. I was trying to get people on social media, anyone to care. And just no one cares because, one thing about the news that is true is the news has to be new. There's nothing new happening. It was just like, oh yeah, you rescue some dogs. Good for you. Now go home and do your thing. I will say, I think the mainstream media has become massively less important. And I think in many ways, I think the reason this case sees the attentional climate of Wisconsin and to a certain extent the nation, because you had publications like Science Magazine. I mean, Science Magazine is the most important publication in science, just period, full stop. It is all the most distinguished professors. I mean, you get one article published in Science as a scientist, it makes your career. Like most scientists, probably 99% of scientists will never even dream of getting a public, because it's just got one edition. There's like maybe, I don't, some scientist is going to correct me. I'm going to ballpark and say there's like 8 papers every edition of Science. Just, it's very hard to get into science. And Science has written repeatedly about this case, questioning whether there's something profoundly wrong with the way science is approaching animal experimentation. But as important as that is, you know, I'm at the point where, not just because of my personal experiences, because of the huge amount of evidence that's come out over the last 10 years about how social change happens, that the mainstream media basically follows the grassroots. If we have enough power, they will report on what we do. We just have to get the power, right? And I think the reason so many people started writing about Ridgeland is because there are rallies. There are people on Facebook. They saw, and this guy, Brian Polson, I think at Fox, and I think he's actually in Milwaukee. He's not even in Madison. He's done just some of the best coverage of this. One of the reasons he keeps covering it is every time he covers it, it blows up on Facebook. You look at the comments, it's like his typical story might have like 5 or 6 comments, and then every story about Ridgeland's got like hundreds of comments. So, and this is why, I mean, I think so often we think social change is difficult and out of reach. It's in some ways that's true. It's complicated how to organize a campaign. You think about these big, complicated legal systems, figuring out the vulnerability in the system that's going to create change. It's hard. But it's also actually really easy. All of us can play our little role just by speaking up, you know? And this is like probably the most important advice I give every activist is just speak up, even if your voice shakes, wherever and whenever you can. Don't even think about it too much. If you're scared, speak even more. If you're scared, even more reason to speak up. But as long as we speak up everywhere, we are fueling momentum for transformative change. So yeah, and I think that's part of the reason the mainstream media is willing to cover this, because they saw so many people speaking up.
Yeah. Yeah, they always have an angle, and certainly they want to get eyeballs. So it's not always the best reason, a heart-based reason, but nonetheless, people can really search online and see that there really was a bunch of, especially local in Wisconsin, in that area, coverage of that. And I'm wondering what effect, if any, or we hope, that this will have on breeders who breed for pets. I mean, there's a correlation there, certainly. I mean, there's a lot of activism around that too. What would be our hope for that, to draw a direct line between those breeders and breeders?
I think in many ways, the fact that we have been able to shut down as a movement, now 2 of the largest breeders for experiments, is going to directly feed into the campaign to stop breeders for pets. Because, so interestingly, the Animal Welfare Act and the entire paradigm around animals used in research has heightened standards. The standards used for research animals is this thing called the Guide. I forget, it's basically a guide created by this organization. I think it's created by this organization called ALAC. The Association, what does ALAC stand for? I always forget what the acronym stands for. It's basically this big industry organization that promotes standards for animal welfare in laboratories. And they have claimed, and to some extent rightfully so, their standards are higher than typical breeders. So yes, we're sending dogs to these awful experiments. Yes, they're being surgically mutilated. Yes, we're forcing them to inhale smoke. But don't worry, we have extra high standards. So these dogs are going to live in utopia until we vivisect them. And the fact that we consistently find that even in these so-called more humane facilities, you're finding beagle puppies being thrown in freezer bags alive, animals having their vocal cords ripped out, apparently without any sort of painkiller or anesthesia. And this is the humane type of facility. What does that tell you about the other breeders? You know, because the dogs originally are actually really expensive. You know, you buy a beagle from a typical breeder, I mean, you might pay like a few $100s, but many of these dogs go for thousands and thousands of dollars, right? And they need to make sure they're in perfect health. And the fact that for them, you know, it's okay to raise a few thousand dogs and have even a few hundred just thrown into the landfill and burned, you know, because, every now and then the market goes down. We just don't have the business we thought we did, so we were just going to slaughter 100 dogs. The fact that this is the way the industry with the heightened standards is operating tells you a lot about how the cheaper dogs are being treated. So yeah, I think it all relates. Do you have a dog, right, Michelle?
I have 3.
3? Yeah. Do you think that the culture has shifted in, say, the last 20 years on breeding versus adopting?
Yeah, I think so. I
Yeah.
think so in general. And there's lots of initiatives now to shut down and ban the sale of puppies and dogs and animals, live animals in pet stores. And there's a lot of initiatives that have been, put out there. So yeah, I think it's definitely has public support, I think, in the
Is it
adoption
legal
shop.
in New
But
Jersey
still,
and New York?
um,
I should know. In California, it's been illegal for a while. Did you know this? You can't sell dogs in pet stores in California. Shut down, like, I think it was
I
like
know
10
it's
years
not
ago. It was a
legal
while
in
ago.
Pennsylvania because I know it's legal in Pennsylvania still, but I'm not
Oh,
sure in New
really?
Jersey, and I should know this
Yeah.
in that
Yeah,
as
no,
well.
I think the movement, it's basically the writing is on the wall. I just feel like there's so much momentum there, and it's because of a lot of, because, and this again shows you how there's so many different voices in the movement. And it's funny because I very much consider myself an effective altruist in the sense that I think we should prioritize our resources and make sure we're optimizing and doing the best we can with every minute of time, every dollar. But I also think the diversity of approaches is incredibly important, because if we all invest in one campaign or one industry or one type of activism, that's inevitably going to fail. That what we have to do is innovate and diversify. And so I'm proud of all the rescue groups. I think it's completely badass that you have all these rescue groups that often are not talking about vivisection. They're certainly not talking about farm animals at all, going out there and just making sure we shut down puppy mills. We prevent people from breeding and selling dogs in pet stores, because that all that is feeding into this cultural paradigm shift we're seeing, where for the first time in history, I really think animal rights is a real political force.
Yeah. So what do you think is going on if we were a fly on the wall inside of Ridgeland Farms right now? What do you think you'd see in terms of the employees scrambling? Of course, more importantly, the dogs are languishing, but they are currently still selling them. They're still trapped and being sold. And, in an ideal world, they get surrendered tomorrow and they reach out to us and say that. Well, what would be the thought about mobilizing to home a couple of thousand, right? Several thousand, right? Dogs.
Yeah. So on the first part of the question, what do you think is going on at Ridgeland Farms? I have a little bit of insight into this because I actually just talked to their attorney last week. And I did promise confidentiality of that conversation. So I will keep that conversation confidential because I promised it. And, I should hold up my end of the bargain even when I'm talking to vivisectors. So I won't share the details of that. What I will share, just based on publicly available information, statements they've made, is that the company's feeling very, very frantic. They realize that the public and increasingly even the government, again, not because the government is, filled with heroes and courageous people, but because the government is just feeling an enormous amount of pressure, that even the government's turning against them. So one of the weirdest things about this entire case is the number of times Ridgeland has sued the government. Like they filed another lawsuit against the government just a couple of weeks ago. And so I think that's great. I want, it's a great thing for all the pillars of support for a vile and evil industry to be fighting each other, right? The government, the industry, let's let them fight. And this is a lesson for us too, because they try to do the same to us. They try to cause us to fight each other. And that's incredibly draining of resources. But I just love it when I see our adversaries all fighting each other and suing each other, because, the government has been, they've been running cover for animal abuse for decades. I mean, they're the ones who really started the entire industry of dog vivisection in the Cold War, when they basically commissioned all these researchers. I think initially it was in Utah, to shoot all these dogs up with radiation and see what happened. And the fact that you now have the government and the industry fighting with each other is a great sign. The other thing they've said is, which is interesting, is they won't release dogs to anyone who is opposed to experimentation, which is such a weird thing for me because, I guess maybe at the end of the day, they just still want to cling to this idea that, and yeah, this has to be why, because they're seeing the public, the norms around them, the ethics of our society transform in this very powerful way. And where does that leave them? I mean, this guy, Jim Burns, who's one of the founders of Ridgeland Farms, they started in the 1960s. Basically, after the initial round of radiation experiments, the government said, imposed, there are kind of two things that happened. The government basically said that labs that are experimenting on animals had to get them from like specially designed breeders, right? You can't just like, because it used to be the case, they just pull dogs off the street and perform horrible experiments on them. But then there was this big expose, I think it was in the 1960s, showing that sometimes like just lost dogs, like your dog is lost on the streets and some vivisector decides to inject him with rabies, or your cat, goes in your neighbor's yard and some vivisector grabs the cat and decides to like vivisect his brain and like put him in a head restraint chair and just tear open his skull and, fuck up his brain. And there was mass public outcry against this. So in the 1960s, Ridgeland became a business because the government said, you can't just pull dogs and cats off the street. You got to get them from specially licensed breeders. It's going to be regulated. And they went to the public again. This is the government mostly just running cover for the industry. They said to the people, yes, you're right. This is really disturbing. These people should not be performing experiments on these poor dogs who are just lost in the streets or on a pound. But now we have a regulated industry. Everything's going to be fine. Right? And Ridgeland started in the 1960s, partly as a result of this new standard where laboratory animals had to be coming from specific breeders or breeding the lab animals. And they've now spent their entire lives. I mean, 1966 was like, what, 50 years ago? Almost exactly. And so Jim Burns, for example, spent his entire life. And I think the reason he doesn't want to release any of these dogs to anyone who's an opponent of animal experimentation is because of his ego, his narcissism. He doesn't want to believe that what he was doing was a horrible crime. And you see this across the board in many other instances of horrible moral atrocities. Even when people have conceded they're guilty, even when they've given up, even when they've been imprisoned for their wrongful conduct, one of the last things they will not give up is their identity. They cling to this identity they have. And I will say this is a human flaw. Like all of us have this to some extent, and all of us should challenge us within ourselves. But I do think the fact that the pillars of support are crumbling. Public opinion is rapidly shifting against animal experimentation, not just on the left, but on the right too. The fact that the company is now committed to shut down, maybe there'll be some interesting openings. And I mean, one of my first phone calls after this is all done is probably going to be the same guy, Jim Burns and Rick Van Dalen. I'd love to talk to them and encourage them to undertake some growth because we all have a short amount of time on this planet. We all make mistakes. Why wouldn't you want to grow? And there's no better story than someone who's involved. It's funny, I'm in seminary now and I'm reading about all these biblical stories. And some of the most legendary stories in the history of human civilization are stories of people who did horrible, corrupt things and then grew. Like St. Paul. I mean, many of you probably know Paul from the Bible. The biblical story is he was going around murdering Christians. He was going around just like persecuting them and trying to put them in prison and mass murdering them on behalf of the Pharisees. And then, there's a famous moment on the road to Damascus where he sees a light in the air and he realizes I have to change my ways, like there's no better story than that. So yeah, I hope I get to talk to these guys and I hope some of them see the light. And I will say, maybe I'll see the light too. I'm sure there are things I sometimes feel bad about the anger I feel about this case because this is very personal for me. I mean, every time I think about these dogs, like I don't want to say what I think in my head. And I meditate a lot. I'm a very nonviolent person. I don't wish any evil or suffering on any sentient being. But I will say, when I see someone torturing a dog, it tests me. It tests my nonviolence. And I have to grow from that because I think that is one of the fatal flaws of movements, that when we get corrupted by our own anger and it seeps into our hearts and we feel hatred towards other sentient beings. I'm not saying anything about tactics. I think pressure campaigns can be very effective. I think shouting at people can be very effective. I think disrupting is very effective. But when it seeps into our hearts and our identity, and when you go to sleep, there have been some nights in the last few weeks, for example, when I go to sleep at night and I'm just feeling it in my heart. I'm just like, oh, I'm so angry. And it affects me. Like I can't be as effective and active as I can't write. I can't think. I can't strategize. I can't get out there on the streets and do the work I need to do when I feel this inside me just eating away at me. So we all have to find ways to grow.
Yeah, and let that out. Those are all normal emotions. Acting out on them is not okay, but feeling them, but not living into it, right? Not letting it overtake you or overcome you or become part of your identity. You don't want to hate others and then you'll become hateful, right?
Yeah.
Be angry with others and then become an angry person in general overall, because that's like poison in our own systems. It's toxic
100%.
to our bodies and our minds and our self-perception and our perception of others, so that's a
Yeah, one
really
thing about AC that I really love, by the way, is AC does these like super aggressive protests that are, like very, very intense. And honestly, like it's hard for me to be a part of them sometimes because like I said, I'm an angry person, but in general, like unless I'm in the mindset where I'm thinking about the animal being abused, like I'm a people pleaser. I like people to like me. I like other people. And AC does these really intense protests. But then you talk to people outside of the protests, and every single one of them is just so sweet. And you realize, oh, you're doing something right. You know how to turn it on, but also not allow it to corrupt you in your own life, in the way you interact with your fellow activists, with your family, with your loved ones in your everyday life. And I do think part of that is just AC has a great community. It's like people just coming together, having a good time. And I can see that people love each other. And that makes a huge difference. So right on. Keep it
it's
up.
not. Well, it's a whole spectrum. We support the whole spectrum of activism, of course, in that way, but it's almost like we put on that raucous hat and then we take it.
Yeah.
We don't wear it all the time, but when we take it off after that, and we're just like everybody else, just like you and me, peaceful in general. But I know we have to wrap up, right? Don't we? In a minute
Yeah,
here,
I should
and
leave in like 4 minutes.
you have to leave in 4 minutes. That's fine. That's fine. To be continued, right? And we didn't
To
really
be continued.
to be TBD.
TBD.
See, yeah.
TBC. We're going to invent a new thing. TBC.
So with that, do you have any, I guess, real sort of quick, any other groups you want to give a shout out to in regard to this victory, like Dane for Dogs, and any calls to action that you want to make sure?
Look, everybody has been so amazing, and this is just another example of how, like, when the movement works together, we're so much more powerful, But like, obviously Rebecca Robinson and Dane for Dogs, they've been relentless on the ground in Wisconsin. But more recently, PETA, like Alka Chandna is just like one of the legends of the movement. I love her so much. She's incredible. They've been so supportive. Tammy at Animal Illness Action has been amazing on this. The people at the Dane County Humane Society, not necessarily animal rights people, but just dog and cat rescue people, have been amazing, signing letters for us, mobilizing support. Who also am I missing? The Marty Project, another local group that focuses specifically on beagles, have been amazing. Like Amy has been relentless. She has so much hustle. It's actually one of the things that like most actors don't realize. You just have to put yourself into an action mindset. Don't just responding to stuff. Like, if you're the sort of person who there's a group chat and you're never saying anything, one thing you could do to become more effective is just start saying stuff, like chime in. You're just sort of the person who sees all these social media posts about animal abuse, just scroll through your feed and you never click a like or hit a comment. Hit like and add a comment. I mean, every step of the way is so important in creating more engaged movement. And the reason I say this is because, like, Amy and Marty Project is enormous hustle and energy, and just like it's relentless with her, and it's really powerful. Trying to think who else I missed. I mean, AEC has helped too, to be honest. Like, we've been doing some pressure campaign stuff. I don't normally do pressure campaigns, and some people at AEC, like Lauren's been great. And ICAW actually signed the letter recently. The International Council for Animal Welfare, Chris and Mark at ICAW signed the letter we sent to the prosecutor right before he announced that he's going to shut down resident farms. So I mean, honestly, I just feel like everybody's worked together. I mean, even Humane Wolf for Animals, like the big, NGO. Like I'm giving them some shade. This is like I'm not doing a very good job. No, I actually think legitimately Humane Society has some incredibly powerful activists involved. And it's a big NGO and great. I'm like totally putting my foot in my mouth right now. This is terrible.
No, you're
No,
fine.
I love everybody. For the record. I just think it's just such a great example of how a powerful ecosystem and community of activists from divergent perspectives and backgrounds can do something tremendous for the animals. So we should keep doing that. Including you. Yeah. Thanks for having us on.
Oh my gosh, right? Because we're all doing what we can do, and this is another
We're all
part
doing
of
what
what
we
we
can
can do. We have these conversations, and we're putting it out there in publicly. And
Yeah.
we certainly want this to reach people, and we want people to share this. But we are trying to bask in the wind. We're trying to capture the glow and hold on to
Indeed.
it. And not that we're patting
Oh,
ourselves on the back. We're saying that's it. We're done. No more work. But at the same time, everybody can exhale a little bit when we when
yeah.
we have a win
Actually,
like
there's one thing I should say is tentatively, we're organizing a big direct action conference for March in New York, and I'm gonna coordinate this around AAC and make sure it doesn't conflict with AAC or any other animal rights group. But stay tuned for something in March, because if you want to take this momentum from Ridgeland and go after Cop Road in New York City or the horse carriages in New York City or whatever the campaign is, I think there are tremendous tools we've developed in the context of the Ridgeland case that I am desperate to share with as many people as I can so we can shut down more of these evil places. And we will be sharing these tools in March in New York City, most likely. It's not 100%, but it's pretty close. So stay tuned for that. Currently, the tentative title is Defending Compassion. So,
I like it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, stay tuned for that. Certainly, we want to support one another in that. And I don't want to keep you for longer because I know you have to get somewhere. But let me just say thank you for your time. Thank you for all your
Thank
do,
you.
and thank you for who you are. So thank you, Wayne, very much. But let's folks can hang on for another minute. So I'm just going to wrap up with some AAC business. But thank you so much, Wayne. Much love to you and your dogs.
Yep.
Yay.
TBC.
Yep, TBC. That's
all right.
All right. So as we wrap up, please register for our New York Fur Free Weekend, November 27th through 30th. 4 days of action targeting the fur industry. Please donate to the convergence if you can. We should be able to drop the link in the comments section for that. As I said before, please register. Even if you don't need housing, we still would love for you to register so we know who to anticipate is attending. For as little as $2 a month, please consider becoming a patron by finding AAC on Patreon. Your donations allow AAC to continue to provide free educational resources for activists, which ultimately saves more animals. If you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee or want to get involved, please visit our website. Please hit subscribe here on our channel, smash the bell, and give us a like so you can keep up with everything AAC. So I think that is all for now. Thank you all for being here. Have an amazing day. Until next time, AAC signing off.